Welcome back to Lessons from the Front and this after-action report of a bolt-action version 3 game between Alfred and myself. I am Eugene and thank you for watching my channel. Our game was played on a standard 6x4 foot table set in a North African village. My 1000 Royal Natal Carbineers consisted of 3 platoons, a rifle, an artillery, and an armoured platoon as pictured. Alfred's 1000 appoint Italiano list also had 3 platoons, a rifle, a heavy weapons, and an armoured platoon. We rolled for the mission and played demolition from the long edges in Fog of War. This is an exciting scenario. I hope you enjoy it. I deployed the bulk of my infantry platoon on my left, purposefully leaving my right and my camp open and vulnerable to an Italian thrust, hoping to emulate the great Napoleon at Austerlitz. With both Alfred and I having to keep half of our forces off table in reserve, my plan was to delay the use of my reserves intended for the defense of my camp long enough to see if any of them could be brought against Alfred's rear instead. Considering that the destruction of our opponent's camp was the winning objective for this scenario, I'd taken a gamble, especially once I saw Alfred deploy his Blackgeschütze in the defense of his camp. I realized that my camp was wide open, and if I was not to bring any reserves on to protect my camp, the game would be over before I could even reach Alfred's base. I received the first order dice and decided to open fire with my 25-pounder. Alfred had placed his sniper on the water tower opposite my right front, and for the second game in a row, I got very lucky. Not only did I roll a 6 to have my 25-pounder successfully range in, but I then followed that roll up with a consecutive 6 to blast Alfred's sniper to smithereens. First blood to the Carbineers. Hurrah! My 25-pounder's observer immediately began to feel the brunt of Alfred's revenge, his 2 light mortars hailing death down from the hot Libyan skies. In spite of my observer's dash to a neighbouring building, having narrowly escaped death in Alfred's first round of barraging from his pair of light mortars, my observer soon found himself under mortar fire again, Alfred's light mortar teams relentless and eventually destroying my observer, leaving my 25-pounder blind and in ambush for the rest of the game. In the meanwhile, Alfred's infantry had been pressing forward, reaching the buildings along the railway line, supported by Semovente and Sahariana. I was feeling the pressure, and for an entire turn, none of my reserves would roll low enough to be brought on in the defense of my camp. I was sweating. I was really worried that Alfred would reach my camp unopposed. My sniper, a chap by the name of Johannes Hendrik van der Merwe, from a small town called Twee Buffels met een skoot mors dood geskietfontein, momentarily kept Italian heads down, buying precious time for much-needed reserves to arrive through his skillful use of his Lee Enfield. As Alfred's armoured platoon circled round towards my open right, I finally, and much to my relief, rolled low enough to bring on my honey. I ordered the honey to advance and fire upon the Semovente, but her 37mm shell whizzed harmlessly over the Italians, and much to my horror, Alfred's returning shot turned my honey light tank into a blazing wreck, the hot flames adding to the scorching heat of the African sands. Fortunately for me, just when Alfred was looking to begin his push towards my base, I was able to bring on my Bren gun carrier and my Marmon Harrington from reserve. The Marmon Harrington immediately began to suppress Alfred's black shirts massing in the buildings on the far side of the railway line. This forced Alfred to roll his semovento into town, which successfully forced my mom in Harrington to recce back out of sight. My plan to rush Alfred's base from my left almost derailed at the railway line. As the boys from Pietermaritzburg reached this linear terrain piece, Alfred unleashed an off-table barrage. Although Alfred's artillery was unable to inflict heavy losses on my squads, he did slow this left thrust down, with them going down under the barrage and then later keeping their heads down when Alfred's semovente turned its attention from my mom in Harrington to the threat of crossing the road to its far right. All I could hope for was that, despite this delay, my squads could reach Alfred's base with enough time to wreak havoc at his camp. With Alfred's semovento distracted and his infantry advancing across the rail tracks, my Bren gun carrier and Marmon Harrington began to work in tandem to stall Alfred's march on my base. Both vehicles advanced and then fired mercilessly into the advancing infantry that were making their way across the tracks. Their withering fire effectively ended all hopes of an outright victory for the Aitais. But Alfred, he is a determined and an experienced warrior. He was not going to let me close on his camp without putting up a stiff resistance. He brought a Fogore squad from reserve to further increase the defense of his camp, occupying the larger market square. As my carbineers pressed towards Alfred's base through the palm groves, his Fogore squad went on the offensive, bursting from the marketplace to close assault on my troops. Although outnumbered 6-8, Alfred's veterans were high in spirits, the Beretta 38 blazing as they charged. But they had not faced cold South African steel before, and after vicious hand-to-hand combat, it was the Royal Natal Carbineers that prevailed and moved in to occupy the empty ruins of the marketplace, and thereby closing ever closer to Alfred's base camp. In an attempt to secure his base, Alfred diverted a second Fogore squad from the center of the village, and they were soon firing down the street at my advancing squads, eliminating the South African platoon commander. With my own base camp now secure under the protection of the Bren gun carrier and the Marmon Harrington, I felt that at this point, late in the battle, I could risk bringing on my final reserves. Taking advantage of the fog of war rule, my veteran carbineer squad arrived from behind Alfred's lines and disembarked from their Ford transport to assault the MMG nest that had been safeguarding the Italian base. With 3 carbineer squads now within 3 inches of Alfred's base, the opportunity presented itself for the South Africans to set charges and demolish Alfred's camp. With the blast echoing across the battlefield, men from both sides knew that victory had been achieved. Victory to the boys from Pietermaritzburg. Hurrah! That brings us to the end of another after-action report from Lessons from the Front. Before I go across for a quick chat with Alfred and to see what we had learned from this game, please do accept my apologies for a rather crap Italiano accent. Please do hit the like button and do subscribe, okay? Okay, so Alfred, did you enjoy that game?
Yes, I did, very much.
We had a 1,000 point version 3, my South African Natal Carbineers against your Italians, right?
Yes, Italian Paris and black shirts.
Yeah, they were tough. All right, so one thing that we've learned from today, playing version 3.
Yeah. One thing I learned in version 3 is talking about anti-tank guns.
Anti-tank guns, okay.
It's under the weapons special rule.
Right.
Anti-tank gun actually gets a +1 modifier if it does a fire order, and that includes ambush as well as reaction fire.
Right, so you're saying that if an anti-tank gun fires and it's stationary,
Yes.
they have to be stationary, and then what happens? What's the bonus?
Then if they fire at another vehicle,
Yes,
whether is it in ambush or in a reaction fire,
right.
it's actually a 3+. You get the hit.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, you get a hit at 3+.
Okay, I was reading with ambush fire, if your weapon is able to fire HE and AT, you have to declare, when
Before,
you go into ambush,
yeah.
you have to declare
Yes.
what type of
Ammunition
you've
is loaded
you've
in.
loaded with. Yes. Okay.
Otherwise, it's by default, it's a HE.
Right.
If it's a howitzer,
Yeah.
but if it's an anti-tank, it's
Yeah.
always AP.
Okay. Which page can we find that rule on, the anti-tank rule?
The page is actually 96
Right.
under the weapons special rules.
So page 96 under the weapons special rule, go and have a look. Alfred, always a pleasure playing with
Pleasure.
you, my friend.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. Thank you.